The possibility of a third world war remains a subject of profound concern and debate among historians, political scientists, and policymakers. Drawing from historical patterns and current geopolitical dynamics, it is evident that several factors could align to spark a conflict of global proportions. However, these factors must also be weighed against mechanisms designed to prevent such an outcome. To reflect on the possibility of a third world war, three crucial elements must be analyzed: the potential for a nuclear war, the impact of regional conflicts, and the dynamics of military alliances. Nuclear posturing has been a central feature of international politics since the advent of atomic weapons in 1945. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, emerged as a cornerstone of Cold War strategy, premised on the idea that the sheer destructive capacity of nuclear arsenals would deter any rational actor from initiating conflict. Yet, the history of nuclear posturing reveals that this balance is precarious and has often teetered on the edge of failure. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 is a defining moment in nuclear history. The Soviet Union's deployment of nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. mainland, was a bold act of brinkmanship. The United States, under President Kennedy, responded with a naval blockade and demanded the removal of the missiles. For 13 tense days, the world stood on the brink of nuclear war, as both sides engaged in an unprecedented display of posturing. The crisis was ultimately resolved through a secret agreement, but it underscored how easily miscalculations and aggressive signaling could spiral into catastrophe. Historians often regard the Cuban Missile Crisis as a case study in the fragility of deterrence, where the personalities of leaders and the limits of communication played decisive roles in averting disaster. The Cold War also saw the proliferation of second-strike capabilities, a key component of deterrence theory. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles and hardened missile silos were designed to ensure that even after absorbing a nuclear attack, a state could retaliate with devastating force. This doctrine, while stabilizing in theory, required constant demonstrations of strength to maintain credibility. The result was an arms race that saw the U.S. and Soviet Union amass tens of thousands of nuclear warheads, far beyond what was necessary for basic deterrence. Each new technological advancement, whether it was the development of MIRVs, multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles, or the Strategic Defense Initiative, introduced new uncertainties, increasing the risk of miscalculation. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked the end of the Cold War, but it did not eliminate the dangers of nuclear posturing. In the years that followed, the world witnessed new challenges to deterrent stability. Regional powers such as India and Pakistan developed nuclear arsenals, and their long-standing rivalry made the subcontinent a flashpoint for potential nuclear conflict. The Cargo War of 1999 highlighted the risks of escalation between nuclear-armed neighbors. Pakistan's use of cross-border infiltration and India's military response brought both countries perilously close to the brink, illustrating that nuclear weapons do not always prevent conflict but can embolden states to act more aggressively under the shadow of their arsenals. In more recent years, North Korea's nuclear program has added another layer of complexity to global deterrence dynamics. The country's development of intercontinental ballistic missiles and its periodic threats of nuclear use have challenged traditional deterrence frameworks. North Korea's strategy of aggressive posturing, including missile tests and provocative rhetoric, aims to secure concessions and recognition from other states. At the same time, its actions destabilize regional security, particularly in East Asia, where South Korea and Japan are forced to recalibrate their own defense strategies. Russia's recent nuclear rhetoric amid its war in Ukraine marks a troubling escalation in posturing. Statements from Russian officials hinting at the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons have revived fears of nuclear war in Europe. These threats, while likely intended to dissuade Western intervention, reflect a dangerous willingness to blur the lines of deterrence. At the same time, the development of advanced weaponry such as hypersonic missiles and autonomous nuclear-capable drones has introduced new uncertainties, undermining established frameworks of strategic stability. The risk of deterrence failure is further exacerbated by the erosion of key arms control agreements. The withdrawal of the U.S. and Russia from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF, and the uncertain future of New START raised the specter of a new arms race. Without robust verification mechanisms and limits on arsenals, the likelihood of miscalculation or accidental escalation increases significantly. Nuclear posturing, while intended to signal strength and prevent conflict, often carries inherent risks of misinterpretation and escalation. As history demonstrates, deterrence is not a static guarantee but a dynamic process, fraught with uncertainties and human fallibility. The constant pressure to maintain credibility, combined with the evolution of technologies and geopolitical rivalries, ensures that the risks associated with nuclear weapons remain as potent today as they were during the Cold War. Proxy wars and regional conflicts have long served as the battlegrounds for larger powers to assert their influence without engaging in direct confrontation. This phenomenon became particularly pronounced during the Cold War, as the United States and the Soviet Union turned countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America into arenas for ideological and geopolitical struggles. These wars, while ostensibly local in scope, often reflected global power dynamics, creating a feedback loop of escalating tensions. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, is one of the earliest and clearest examples. What began as a civil war between North and South Korea quickly became an internationalized conflict. The North was supported by the Soviet Union and later China, while the South was backed by the United States and a coalition of United Nations forces. Though the war never escalated into a direct U.S.-Soviet clash, it underscored how regional conflicts could serve as proxies for superpower competition. The outcome, a divided Korea, remains a focal point of international tensions to this day. Similarly, the Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, became a proxy battleground for the Cold War. The United States intervened to prevent the spread of communism, supporting South Vietnam against the North, which was backed by the Soviet Union and China. For the superpowers, Vietnam represented more than just a local conflict. It was a test of ideological resolve. The war's devastating human and economic toll, combined with its lack of clear resolution, highlighted the dangers of viewing regional conflicts through the lens of global rivalry. The Middle East, too, became a hotspot for proxy wars during the Cold War and continues to serve this role in contemporary geopolitics. The 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan drew the U.S. into supporting the Mujahideen, a resistance movement that received funding, training, and weapons from Western and Gulf Arab nations. While the U.S. achieved its short-term goal of bogging down Soviet forces, the long-term consequences, such as the rise of extremist groups like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, illustrate the unpredictable fallout of proxy conflicts. In the post-Cold War era, the dynamics of proxy wars have evolved but remain deeply entrenched. The Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, exemplifies the complexities of modern regional conflicts. The war has drawn in a host of external actors. Russia and Iran have supported the Assad regime, while the United States, Turkey, and various Gulf states have backed opposition groups, including Kurdish forces. The involvement of so many competing powers has turned Syria into a battleground for influence, with devastating consequences for its civilian population. The conflict in Yemen provides another contemporary example. The war pits a Saudi-led coalition, supported by Western nations like the United States and the United Kingdom, against Houthi rebels, who are backed by Iran. This proxy war reflects broader regional rivalries, particularly between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and highlights how local disputes can become proxies for larger struggles over regional dominance. Russia's recent actions in Ukraine also bear the hallmarks of a proxy conflict. While it is a direct war between Russia and Ukraine, the extensive support provided to Ukraine by NATO countries, including military aid, training, and intelligence, reflects a broader confrontation between Russia and the West. This dynamic has escalated tensions globally, drawing in new actors and creating ripple effects across other regions. The historical patterns of proxy wars suggest they are rarely confined to their original theaters. The global entanglements of the Cold War's proxy conflicts, for instance, fueled arms races and hardened alliances that extended beyond the immediate battlefields. These wars also often exacerbate regional instability, creating power vacuums and refugee crises that spill over into neighboring countries. Proxy wars and regional conflicts remain a defining feature of international relations. They allow larger powers to exert influence and test strategies without committing to full-scale wars, but they often come at an immense human cost. These conflicts, shaped by local grievances but amplified by global rivalries, illustrate how the pursuit of power on the global stage continues to leave lasting scars on the regions where these battles are fought. The role of alliances and military buildups in precipitating major conflicts is one of the most consistent themes in modern history. Before the outbreak of World War I, Europe was locked in a complex web of alliances that, while intended to maintain balance and deter aggression, ultimately created a system prone to escalation. The Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy faced off against the Triple Entente of France, Russia, and Britain. These alliances were not merely defensive pacts. They were underpinned by mutual distrust and a willingness to engage in aggressive posturing to secure strategic advantages. Historians often point to the naval arms race between Britain and Germany as a critical example of how military buildups exacerbate tensions within an alliance system. Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II launched a program to challenge Britain's naval supremacy, epitomized by the construction of dreadnought-class battleships. Britain responded in kind, fueling an arms race that extended beyond ships to encompass broader military capabilities. This militarization heightened fears on both sides, ensuring that any localized conflict could quickly spiral into a broader war, as it did in 1914 following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The interwar period offers further insight into the destabilizing effects of alliances and armament policies. In the 1930s, the League of Nations, intended as a bulwark against aggression, failed to prevent rearmament by major powers. Germany, under Adolf Hitler, flagrantly violated the Treaty of Versailles by rebuilding its military. This remilitarization, coupled with the appeasement policies of Britain and France, created a climate where alliances like the Anti-Comintern Pact between Germany, Italy, and Japan solidified into aggressive blocs. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, sensing the growing threat from the Axis powers, sought non-aggression pacts to buy time for its own military buildup, as seen in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. The Cold War took these dynamics to a global scale, with the NATO and Warsaw Pact alliances embodying the bipolar nature of the post-World War II order. Here, alliances were explicitly structured around the threat of mutual destruction. NATO, formed in 1949, bound Western powers in a collective defense against perceived Soviet aggression. The Soviet response, the Warsaw Pact, created a parallel system in Eastern Europe. These alliances, paired with rapid military buildups including nuclear arsenals, ensured that conflicts like the Korean and Vietnam Wars, while regional in scope, had global implications. The proliferation of arms and military technologies during this period reflected not only ideological rivalry but also a structural imperative to maintain parity or superiority. In the contemporary era, alliances remain potent forces in international relations. The U.S.-led NATO alliance has expanded significantly since the end of the Cold War, bringing in former Warsaw Pact nations and even discussing the inclusion of countries like Ukraine. This expansion has been cited by Russia as a justification for its own military buildups and interventions, notably in Crimea in 2014 and more recently in its invasion of Ukraine. Russia's deepening military ties with China and its partnership with nations like North Korea represent a response to what it perceives as Western encirclement. The historical parallels are striking. Just as in 1914, when alliance commitments transformed the assassination of a minor royal into a global conflict, today's alliances hold the potential to escalate regional disputes. The rapid advancements in military technology, from hypersonic missiles to cyber warfare capabilities, compound the risks. Unlike in the past, these buildups are no longer confined to conventional weapons. They now encompass new domains like space and artificial intelligence, creating an environment where a miscalculation could lead to catastrophic consequences. Military buildups within alliance structures, as history demonstrates, often fail to achieve their intended goal of stability. Instead, they foster mistrust, provoke arms races, and create rigid systems where the actions of one actor can compel responses from all. Whether in 1914, 1939, or the Cold War, the accumulation of arms and the tightening of alliances have repeatedly set the stage for conflict, leaving the world precariously balanced on the edge of war. While the possibility of a Third World War cannot be dismissed, it is neither inevitable nor beyond prevention. The balance depends on the ability of nations to manage their rivalries, maintain effective communication, and commit to systems of cooperation and restraint. History warns of the dangers, but it also provides tools and precedents for avoiding catastrophe. The challenge lies in recognizing these lessons and applying them to the complexities of the modern world. We'd love to hear your thoughts on possible future topics. What areas of human evolution would you like to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As always, our references and further reading are listed in the description below if you'd like to dive deeper into the subject. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode. And do not forget, subscribe to the knowledge.